Okay, so on to domain and range. Finally, we're going to talk about domain and range. Sorry, you guys. So domain, the word should be over a little bit. I didn't realize it was in the wrong place, but domain is all the values that go into a function. So the x values. So remember, when we're doing evaluating a function, remember the like if it was f of -2, this is an x value. It goes in. That's part of my domain. Oops, there's somebody in the waiting room. Olivia. Okay, so my domain is just all of my x values. And when we list them, we always list them from least to greatest. Greatest, if I can spell. Least to greatest, okay? So if I was to name the domain on this graph, that's the little example right here, I would say we're just going to pretend that it ends here and right there. That's where it ends. So right here, we're going to say is 1. And here is 2, 3, 4.5. 4.5, right? And we'll say this has an open. Whoa. We'll say that this one on this end has an open circle. So this one has a closed circle and that one has an open circle because I want to give you an example, okay? So I would say my domain for this example would be included, which is a parenthesis. Remember, if it's in, I'm sorry, not a parenthesis. If it's included, we use brackets to talk about included. Remember when we were doing our inequalities, we talked about it. Included has brackets, not included. So we're still talking about the same type of thing. Included, we use parentheses with. And then infinity, oops, that's not an infinity sign. Infinity and negative infinity, we also use parentheses because we never know where they're at. So we're going to use that same concept that we use with inequalities for interval notation. We're going to use it here for domain and range. So it's a closed dot at 1. And then at 4.5, it's an open dot, so it would be not included. So my domain would go from 1 to 4.5. Okay? Questions on that so far? Are we okay? Don't worry, we're going to go over domain and range a lot today. So if you have a question on this right now, we are going to go over it quite a bit today, okay? In fact, that's all we're doing today is domain and range. We're going to add a little bit like, is it a function in there or not a function, which is stuff we've already done. So you're going to tell me if it's a function or not, which is kind of a little review for the checkpoint that you're going to be doing on tomorrow. Okay, so range is the set of all output values of a function. So the y values. So x is the values that we put into the equation. Y is what it equals, or the output functions. So x is the input, y is the output. And again, we list that also from least to greatest, always, okay? It's always least to greatest. And so, so this was my domain. We talked about my domain there. And now we're going to talk about my range on this one. Range is my y values. So if you look at my range values here, it's from here to here, right? My lowest to my highest. So my lowest is at 1 and it's included. I know it's not exactly, but we're just going to pretend that it was at 1. And here it's about 3.25, and it's included also. See, it's a solid point up here. It's not open, so it's about 3.25. Is there any questions? I just approximated it. The graphs that I gave you, you don't have to do so much approximating on. I made sure that they were right on the points, so you don't have to say, oh, well, I think it's around here. No, you don't have to think it is. Get Siri. I just liked this graph because it said the domain is here, the range is here. In the picture. It says, here's my domain, here's my range. Do you see that right here? So I like that. So here's my domain, right? And here's my range. And not very many pictures do that. So I kind of liked that picture. That's why I used it. Okay, so now we're going to go up. Oh. Okay, and we're going to talk about some tables. Okay, I've got two tables. And the first thing it wants me to do is determine if it's a function or not. So on number one, I'm just going to call it number one. On the first one, can you tell me if the first one is a function or not? Is this first one a function, the first table? And how do I tell if it's a function? Can you guys remember how to tell if it's a function? Because it's going to be on your checkpoint. So how do I tell if a table is a function?
The x-axis doesn't have two numbers that are the same.
Very good. I'm going to look at the x values. And if my x's, if I only have one of each x value, it's a function. So is this one a function?
Yes.
Yeah, this one's a function. Great. So now it says if it's a function, then I have to find the domain and range. Although we're just going to find the domain and range of all of them. It doesn't matter. I should have changed my directions. I didn't think about that. But we're going to find the domain and range of all of them, whether it's a function or not, just so we can practice finding the domain and range. Does that make sense? So my domain is all my x values. So I want to talk about this really quick. So I used interval notation, right? Because my graph was continuous. Remember, this is a continuous graph. It doesn't stop. I can put my pencil on one and draw the whole graph. That means it's continuous without lifting my pencil from it. This, however, is a point. I don't know if I graph this, if it'll be continuous or not. So I can't use interval notation. I have to use set notation. Notation. I can't spell notation. I think that's right. Set notation. And all it is these little curly Q brackets. On your keyboard, they're next to the P. You would have to do Shift P to get them. And there's two of them. You'll see them. There's the right-hand side and the left-hand side. It's next to the P. So I have to do that. And then I have to lift. It really sucks when I have to use shift notation. I kind of don't like it, but you have to do what you have to do. So when I'm using tables or mappings or a set of points, I have to use set notation, which means I have to list all the points out individually unless they're repeated. So for my domain, I have one of each x, and luckily they're already in order from least to greatest for me. So I'm just going to write them. -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. There's my domain. Okay? Because it's from a table. My range, okay, again, from least to greatest. So first I've got -2, and then -1. And look, I have 2 5s. I only have to write it one time. So 5, 6, and 7. So that's all I'm going to write in my range. -2, -1, 5, 6, and 7. Done. Okay, questions? Do you think you can do the next one by yourself? I want you to try. Okay, so try and do let me start. Is this a function or not, and why? Anybody? Is it a function or not?
Yeah.
So if I look at my x's, is there more than one of the same x?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a function.
There. Oh. So I have 2 ones, right? So -2, -1, 0, 1, and 1. So I've got 2 ones, so that means it's good. Not a function. Everyone remember that? Or remember it now? Remember, if it's got more than two of the same one, it's not a function. And then my domain, in order from least to greatest. Again, it's almost in order for me. 0, 1, 2. I don't have to write the 1 more than once, so I just have to write it that way. Okay? And then my range from least to greatest, I think it's already in there from least to greatest, thank goodness. 153, 155, 157, 59, 161, 163. And there we go. So Jasmine, you are so super close. Does that make sense why it's not a function?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Nice job. Nice job, by the way. And thank you for being one of the only people to answer with a full answer. Okay. So here we go. Now we're going to switch to a mapping diagram, right? So we're going to do the same thing. And in my domain and range, I don't only have to have numbers. I can have letters. I can have words. I can have lots of different things in my domain and range, okay? So we're going to start talking about first we're going to say, is it a function or not? So in my first one, or in the black one, because I have a black and a blue one, is it a function? And how do I tell? Well, let's start with this. How do I tell from a mapping diagram if it's a function? I look at my X one. Which circle is my X values? The first one or the second one?
The first one?
The first one. Awesome. Yes. And so how do I tell if it's a function or not? Very good. You guys were all right. It was the first one. How do I tell if it's a function?
When the numbers don't repeat more than once?
Not in a mapping diagram. In a table, yes. And in points, yes. But in a mapping diagram, I'm looking at the arrows, remember? And remember, the arrows can only go from 1 in the X's. There can only be 1 arrow from each X. That's how I tell. So if I look at A, look, I'm like using my hands. I don't know if you guys are watching me when I talk, but I'm trying to use my hands. I'm so sorry. So if I look at A, I'm going to use a highlighter here. A only uses 1 arrow, right? And B only uses 1 arrow. But look at C. It goes to both red and yellow. So guess what? Not a function. Because C has how many? C has got 2 choices when it can only have how many choices? 1 choice. So each one of these can only have 1 choice in the other circle to be a function. That's a good way to put it. Okay, but I can still find my domain and range. What's my domain? What is my domain? My domain is A, B, C, and D. And if it's something other than numbers, I'm going to put it in alphabetical order. Okay, that's least to greatest. With letters is alphabetical order. So my range would be, let's see, what's my first word? Green. And then I would have red. And then I think white comes before yellow. Is that correct? Alphabetically? X, Y, Z. Yeah, that's it. And yellow. Do you guys want to try the blue one? So same logic. Is it a function? Does each one of my X's only go to 1 Y? And then do your domain and range. we go, guys. So most of you guys are right. I think actually everyone that even got it wrong the first time corrected it and said it was a function. Very good. So because each one of my x's only goes to one y, and it's okay if I have more than one x going to a single y, that's okay as long as it's only going to one x is going to one y. So that's okay. So my domain, and you guys fix that also, is alphabetical. So it would be C2 and then D3 and D4. And then my range is also alphabetical. So it would be chips first and then pretzels. Okay? Are we okay so far? With mapping diagrams. And what have we done so far? Tables and mapping diagrams. Okay, so now we're going to get to some that you're going to see a lot more of, which are sets of points and graphs. So we're going to do more of those so you guys will get more practice with those ones because those are the ones you see the most, okay? So I've got 2 that I'm going to do, and then you've got 4 that you're going to do. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to determine whether it's a function or not. And how do I determine if it's a function? Well, I'm going to look at the x values. So I've got 3, -1, 2, 1, 0, and 4. So they're all different, which means that this is a function. Beautiful. And then I'm going to find the domain, which means I have to write it in order from least to greatest. So I think my smallest is -1, and then 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Okay? Everyone okay with that so far? And then my range is my y values. And sometimes if you have a hard time remembering which one is x and y, this is how I remember it. So domain comes before range alphabetically, and x comes before y alphabetically. So x goes with domain and range goes with y. Does that kind of help? So they both kind of they both go alphabetically, so it helps a little bit for me to remember. So then my range again in order alphabetically, woo, from least to greatest. -1. So that one's gone. 0. Okay. I've got 2 1s, but I only need to write it once. 3 and 4. Okay. Questions? Are we okay so far? Beautiful. We're going to do the same thing to the next problem, number 2. So I've got 3, -1, 3. Oh, I already know. -1, 3. Wow. -1. There's a whole bunch of repeats there. So that is not a function. So my domain is -1 and 3. That's it. My range, I'm going to slide this up so I'm not writing on top of the recording button. And my range is, my smallest range is -1, 0. Oh, it looks like it's the same range. 1, 3, and 4. Okay. Questions? Are we okay? All right, so we've got 4 smaller problems for you to do. They only have 4 or 5 points each. I'm gonna go ahead and start, at least follow behind you guys. So A function. see, -8, -2, 4, and 5. Nice job, you guys. Still answering questions. You're doing great. Oh. Okay. -3, -2, 0, 4. So this is a function. My domain is -3, -2, 0, and 4. Because -3 is less than -2. Oh, -3 is less than -2. My range is -10, 3, 5, and 9. And then we've got 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1. Wow. So that's not a function. And my domain is 1, which is really easy, right? And then my range is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Done. Nice job, you guys, by the way. That's okay, Zoe. I got the message from you. I'm glad you were able to get back in. I hope you weren't waiting too long for me to let you in. I'm sorry. I was writing. So.
Yeah, it was like taking so long to shut off for some reason. So there might be like a lag with my computer.
Okay. Okay, any questions on, you guys did great, by the way. I want those of you who answered, fantastic, great job. Okay, so now we're gonna move to a graph, okay? And we've got I can't even talk, 6-ish graphs that we're gonna talk about, okay? So it says find the domain and range of the following functions. Assume lines go to infinity unless there's an endpoint. So unless there's like an open dot or a big closed dot, assume that that's an arrow on the end. So I'm gonna just draw, like as I go along, I'll draw. So there's arrows on the end of this one. So it's going to infinity. And then before we start in here, I'm gonna kind of, oh, where's my mouse? I'm gonna kind of put a message in here. So when we're talking about infinity, and we're writing it in the chat box, this is what people have been doing, putting 2 little zeros. I think we've already talked about it before, but infinity and negative infinity, that way you don't have to spell out infinity every time you want to. Or you could do INF and negative INF, but you can do 2 little zeros next to each other, look like infinity. So when you're typing your answer into the chat box, you can do that. Is that okay? Okay, awesome. So these are all functions. These are already all functions. We're not asking you to tell me if they're a function. They're already functions. So we're just going to say what the domain and range is. So domain and range. So these have arrows on both ends, okay? And I hope you can see me because I'm going to use my hands for a minute and demonstrate here. So because there's arrows on the end, that means they're going taller, it's getting lower and higher, but it also means even though it's looking like it's not doing it, and it's doing it very, very slowly, it's also getting wider and wider and wider. It's just getting wider slower than it's getting taller. So it doesn't look like it, but it's getting wider and wider and taller, or shorter, longer and longer, however you want to put it. So it's going forever in both directions, both up and down and left to right. So because it has arrows on both ends and it's not flat, so it doesn't have a flat line on it. So it doesn't have a horizontal line on it. So that means my domain is going from my widest domain from the left is going to be negative infinity. And it's going to go to positive infinity. And my range, well, my range is my y. So my lowest y, it's going to go forever, is negative infinity. And my highest one, it's going to keep going forever, is positive infinity. Questions? Okay. So the next one's a little harder. Again, we've got arrows on the end because it said if there wasn't a distinct endpoint, there's arrows on the end. Beautiful, just like that. Okay. My domain goes from, remember we're doing domain from smallest to greatest, so it's always going to go this way. And I probably should have talked about that. We're going, domain is going this way, that's domain, and range is going from bottom to top, okay? So domain goes from left to right, range goes from bottom to top. So that's what we're going to talk about, okay? So my domain here, we're going to talk my furthest to the left has got an arrow, right? So that means my smallest number is negative infinity. And then as I'm come across my graph on my x's, ooh, I run into a hole, right? So what's that number right there? -1. And it's got a solid dot on it, so it's included. And then there's this gap in there that's not part of my domain. There's no x's in my function. I can't use any of those x's. My next one picks up at 1 included, and then I keep going this direction, and it's got an arrow on the end, so my biggest number is going to be infinity, not included. I'm going to be honest, this is the hardest concept to get. It's the easiest concept and the hardest concept. It's both the easiest and the hardest. I don't know why. Okay, so it is really easy, but it's also super hard. Okay, so I'm not going to lie to you about that part. I'm not going to say, oh, this is so easy. It's not, okay? It's visual. If you can visually see it, I can see it, but unless I can make sense of it, it's not easy. Does that make sense? Okay, so I need you guys to make sure you're asking me questions if you need the help, okay? So my range goes from my lowest number, and my lowest number, I'm going to put it highlighted. My lowest number is right here. Does my graph go below this line? It doesn't go below that line. And remember, my range is my y, so I'm going to put this in parentheses. This is my x values. This is my y values, and this is where we start getting messed up. These are my y values. My y value at this point is 0. So it goes from 0, and then because my arrows means it's going to keep going up, it goes from 0 to infinity, and that's it. So you can draw all over these graphs to help you make sense of it, and sometimes I think that makes it a little better or a little easier. So we're going to do one more together, and then I'm going to let you guys try. I tried to give you guys a little easier puzzles, a little easier graphs to work with. So let's look at this and see what we can do. Well, this one already has arrows on the end. That's beautiful. So that means it's going to keep getting wider and wider forever. It's just pointing out to the x ways. So if I'm going from left to right, my domain is going from negative infinity to, because my arrow is going to keep going out, right? So it's going to keep going from negative, it's coming from negative infinity. Even though and I think this is part of the problem, even though my arrow is pointing this direction, I'm reading from this direction, so it's coming from negative infinity this way, okay? And then it's going, this arrow here is pointing towards positive infinity. So it's going from negative infinity to positive infinity. Now this range is a little funky because I'm going to highlight this. This is my lowest point. My graph doesn't go down any lower than this because what happens to this line or this piece of the graph is it flattens out. It doesn't go any lower. It becomes not vertical, horizontal, becomes a horizontal line. Wow. Okay, so it flattens out and doesn't go any lower than -4. So my range starts at my lowest range. Wow. My lowest range is -4. And then because I have an arrow here and it's still going up, my highest range or my highest y is going to be 0. Infinity. Wow. Okay, it's going to be infinity. 0. Okay, now I'm going to let you guys try this. I'm going to slide this up. There's 3 graphs, A, B, and C. I'm going to have you try and find the domain and range. If you don't understand it, make sure you're typing in some questions about what you don't understand. Remember, domain, I'm going to make a little note over here. Domain is the x values, and range is my y values. Just because it's on a graph doesn't mean it's changed. It's just changing how I'm answering it. Okay? So I want you to try. Let me record. That would probably be good, huh? Okay. So my domain goes from here to here. And if you see my endpoints are included because they're solid dots, which means I'm going to use the bracket, right? Bracket means it's included. If it was an open point like this, see this down here? I'm going to highlight it. This one down here is an open point. Then I would use the parenthesis. But because it's a close point this way, it's a solid dot, I'm going to use the included brackets. Remember, I wrote that down on the other page, but I'll write it down here also. So included, which is a solid point, would be the brackets. Not included, which is the open point, is the parentheses. That didn't really look like a parenthesis. Or if I have in negative infinity or infinity, it's also the parentheses. Does that help a little bit? So if I go back to my graph over here, I've got -4. It goes to from -4 to +4. Okay, that's it on that graph. That's as far as it goes, from -4 to +4. Okay, and then my range, my lowest range is from here to here. And my range, remember, is this way. Domain is this way. This is domain. This is range. So my lowest range is 0. And it goes to 4, it looks like. 4. And it's included also. Okay, did that help out a little bit? Drawing on the graph, I mean like that. I don't know if it does. We'll try it again on this one. So my domain, remember, goes on my x-axis. So it's from here to here is my domain. Domain. So my domain would go from, sorry, I have to pick up my iPad to see, -4 to 3. Okay, and my range goes from my lowest point, so I'm going to erase this so I can see better, from my lowest point, which is here, to my highest point, which is here. It doesn't have to be an end point, it's just my lowest point to my highest point. My lowest point is -2, and it's a solid point, so it is included. To my highest point, which is 5, which has no open point, so that's included also. Okay? And then the last one, C, I've got arrows on the end, so it's going to keep getting wider and wider and wider. So my domain is going to be from -infinity to +infinity. Let's just say mostly my domain, if there's arrows on both ends of the graph, it almost always goes to -infinity from negative infinity to positive infinity. So that's why I always look for arrows on the end and I circle them. So that gives me an idea that it's going to go from negative infinity to positive infinity. Now, if one arrow is pointing up and one arrow is pointing down, then my range will also be from negative infinity to positive infinity. But in this case, they're both pointing up. So I know my range has a low point, and my low point is right there, and it's an open point, so that's my lowest point is -2, and because my arrows are pointing up, that means it goes to infinity. Does that help a little bit? You guys are going to get some practice with the graphs. The rest of them you are pretty good on, and Delta Math doesn't have a lot of the rest. It mostly just has graphs. So we're going to work on Delta Math for the next 14 minutes. So if you have questions on Delta Math, we can share the screen and I can help you with it. And if you don't want to be in the big group, we can go into a breakout room and I can help you with it there. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Okay, you guys.